Let's take a closer look at the rocket on your screen. You're looking at a live view of Falcon 9. The two-stage rocket stands 70 meters tall. That's greater than the wingspan of a 747 aircraft. Now, the bottom two-thirds of the vehicle is the first stage. Its job is to accelerate the vehicle through the Earth's atmosphere into space with the help of the 9 Merlin 1D engines at the base of the rocket. Now, it's also the part of the booster that we recover and reuse, with tonight marking the 10th flight of this particular booster. Now, the first stage you see on your screen tonight has supported 6 previous Starlink missions, as well as GPS 3.3, Turksat 5A, and Transporter 2. Now, although it might be a bit dark in Florida right now, if you look closely, you might be able to see the soot markings left over from its previous 9 flights. We will be attempting to recover the first stage on one of our drone ships, a Shortfall of Gravitas, which for reference is about the size of a football field. Now, if successful, it will mark the 103rd successful recovery of an orbital class rocket. On top of the first stage is the black carbon fiber inner stage, which is a composite structure that connects the first and second stages and houses the pneumatic pushers that allow the first and second stages to separate during flight. And on top of that is the Falcon 9 second stage, which has a single Merlin vacuum or MVAC engine. Once the first and second stages separate at about 2.5 minutes into the mission, that single MVAC engine will ignite and carry the Starlink satellites to a low Earth orbit around the Earth. You'll also notice that large nose cone at the very top of the rocket. This is the payload fairing, and it protects our Starlink satellites until the vehicle is outside the Earth's atmosphere, at which point we don't need it anymore and the fairings will separate to expose the satellites to space. Just as we reuse Falcon 9, we also recover and reuse our fairing halves. The fairing halves we're using tonight are flight proven, and tonight's flight will be the second flight for both of these fairing halves. We are planning to recover these halves again using our recovery vessel Doug once they return to Earth. Propellants have been loading on the vehicle since T-minus 35 minutes. Now again, Falcon 9 is a bipropellant vehicle, which means it uses 2 propellants, a fuel and an oxidizer. An oxidizer is a type of chemical that a fuel requires in order to burn. So for Falcon 9, our fuel is a refined form of kerosene known as RP1, and our oxidizer is a super chilled liquid oxygen, also called LOX. Now, the liquid oxygen is chilled well below its boiling point so that it becomes what we call densified. And this just means that it has a much greater amount of mass per volume and means we can load more of it into the booster. Additionally, Falcon 9 also needs an ignition source in order to go. And for that, we use the chemical TTEB, or triethyl aluminum and triethyl borane. Once it's fully fueled, Falcon 9 holds just over 1 million pounds of propellant that the vehicle will burn through in less than 3 minutes after liftoff.
Start of the 1D engine chill.
Currently, fuel is nearly fully loaded on stage 1 and already full on stage 2. Liquid oxygen is nearly full on stage 1 and about 80% on stage 2. Now, once all the tanks are full, both stages will continue to be topped off with liquid oxygen until T-minus 2 minutes, to keep the temperatures as cold as possible. The latest weather forecast shows we're 80% favorable for liftoff. If for some reason we don't launch tonight, we do have a backup opportunity tomorrow at 6:40 p.m. Eastern Time.
Stage 1 fuel loads complete.
In a few minutes, Falcon 9 will lift off, carrying our Starlink satellites to low Earth orbit. Now, in order to get these satellites into space, the rocket has to do more than just go up. It also has to go sideways really, really fast. So at liftoff, gravity is pulling straight down on the rocket. And as we ascend, we tilt the engines, technically called gimbaling, and that turns the rocket horizontally. We're still going up, but now we're also headed horizontally away from the launch pad. This is what we call a gravity turn. The rocket typically needs to go 17,500 miles per hour horizontally in order to avoid being pulled back down to Earth and actually get into orbit. To help demonstrate this concept, imagine firing a cannon from a really high mountain. The cannonball will arc, and then gravity will pull it down to Earth. As you increase the power, the cannonball will arc and land further and further away. Eventually, if you could continue to increase the power enough, the cannonball will be going so fast that it ends up in free fall around the Earth. Gravity is still pulling down on the cannonball, but it's going so fast that it never actually hits the ground. This arc, which constantly misses the Earth, is called an orbit.
Falcon 9 tanks are pressurizing for strong back retract.
So when we get to liftoff today, keep an eye on the orientation of Falcon 9. You'll see that we'll go straight up until about T plus 10 seconds, at which point we begin that shift in orientation so Falcon 9 can go sideways really fast. But before we get into that, let's check in on the status of the vehicle for today's launch. We are currently just under T minus 4.5 minutes from liftoff.
Strong back retract has started.
Of our 36th launch of Starlink. And you just heard the call out that that truss structure, or the TE, has begun retraction. In preparation for that retraction, those TE clamps you see right below the fairing there will begin to open up to allow the transporter erector to retract. You can see those clamps opening now. So the transporter erector will begin to pull away from the rocket slightly before at T0 the hydraulics will pull the transporter erector even further away from the Falcon 9 as it lifts off. Now again, the TE is the structure that provides liquids, gases, electrical connections to the second stage, as well as air conditioning to the payload fairing and the Starlink satellites. You can see that slow retraction of the transporter erector in progress. At this point in the countdown, both the first and second stages are nearly fully loaded with 1 million pounds of kerosene fuel and liquid oxygen. And those white clouds that you see around Falcon 9 are created when that super chilled liquid oxygen comes in contact with the air in Florida. We just had that call out, that first stage. LOX loading has completed here at T minus a little under 3 minutes, and the second stage LOX loading will complete at T minus 2 minutes in just about 40 seconds here. At T minus 60 seconds, Falcon 9 will be in startup, so this means that the rocket's autonomous internal flight computers will have taken over the launch countdown, and
Stage 2 LOX throttle back.
And just inside of T minus 2 seconds, we will light the Merlin 1D engines, and we're set for liftoff. Starlink payload continues to be healthy, and Falcon 9 team is not tracking any issues at this time. Here at just a little over T minus 2 minutes, we are moving into the terminal countdown.
Stage 2 LOX loads complete.
We've finished the second stage liquid oxygen loading. We are now fully loaded with over 1 million pounds of kerosene fuel and liquid oxygen. We are waiting for T minus 1 minute when the Falcon's internal flight computers will take over the countdown. And stage 1 and stage 2 will begin pressurizing for launch.
Falcon 9's in startup.
Falcon 9 is in startup. We're waiting for that final launch director go for launch in just a few seconds.
Launch director, go for launch.
We have that final go from the launch director. All systems are go. Let's listen in to the terminal count and watch as Falcon 9 takes our 49 Starlink satellites to orbit.
T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition and liftoff.
Vehicle is pitching downrange.
Stage 1 chamber pressure is nominal.
Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off from Launch Complex 39A at Kennedy Space Center, carrying our stack of 49 Starlink satellites to orbit. Moments ago, we throttled the engines down
Telemetry nominal.
in preparation for max Q, or maximum aerodynamic pressure, which will happen here in just a few seconds at T plus 1 minute and 12 seconds.
Falcon is supersonic. Max Q.
We have just passed through max Q, and this is the maximum aerodynamic pressure that the stage sees. Next, we'll have 3 events happening in quick succession. First, we'll have main engine cutoff, followed by stage separation, and then second engine startup 1. Now, first, main engine cutoff is where all 9 of those M1D engines on that first stage will shut off to slow the vehicle down in preparation for stage separation. This is where the first
engine chill has begun.
This is where the first and second stages will separate, with the first stage starting to make its way back to Earth for landing, while the second stage continues on its journey to the third event of second engine startup 1. And this is where that single MVAC engine on the second stage will light up and propel the second stage along with the Starlink satellites to orbit. We're a little under 30 seconds away from these 3 events. You'll want to watch out for fairing deploy, which is going to happen shortly after that. Hopefully we get cool live views from the second stage camera of those fairing halves popping off.
Nico.
Stage separation confirmed.
Ignition.
Wow, beautiful views from the first stage and second stage
Both
tracker
stages
there.
are on nominal trajectories.
We did have successful MECO
Fairing
stage
separation
separation.
confirmed.
There's fairing deployment there. Again, what a cool view from the second stage. Again, we did just have confirmation of successful fairing deployment. Again, SpaceX has reflown the Falcon fairing halves since November of 2019. Again, this was our second flight for both of those, and we will be attempting to recover them on our recovery vessel, Doug. It looks like you can just maybe make out those fairing halves in that live view from the ground as they are flying away from the second stage there. It looks like that's the first stage, maybe also floating off to the left. Now, as stage 2 heads towards its targeted drop-off orbit there, stage 1 will execute 2 burns in order to make its way back home to Earth. Now, the first is an entry burn. Now, this is where 3 of the M1D engines will reignite, and this helps to slow the stage down as it re-enters the upper parts of the Earth's atmosphere. Now, the second burn, of course, is the landing burn, and this is a single engine burn that brings the vehicle's speed down rapidly in order to land on the drone ship.
Acquisition signal.
If you're just catching up with us, we had a successful launch of Falcon 9 from Launch Complex 39A at Kennedy Space Center, and you're looking at a live view from Falcon 9's second stage as it is delivering our Starlink payloads to orbit. Stage 1 is currently making its way back to our drone ship, a Shortfall of Gravitas in the Atlantic Ocean. We had beautiful views from the ground of the first and second stage plumes there just a little while ago. Now the Merlins on the first stage are optimized for sea level, so these achieve 190,000 pounds of thrust during ascent and descent. And in contrast, the MVAC engine, which you see on your screen right now, is optimized for 220,500 pounds of thrust in vacuum. Now the primary difference between these two engines is just the size of the nozzle. The MVAC nozzle is a lot larger than the M1D nozzles on first stage. Now the Falcon 9 is equipped with 4 hypersonic titanium grid fins positioned near the top of the first stage. And the first stage is using these grid fins to help navigate and reorient itself as it heads back home to Earth. The first stage also has an attitude control system, which you can sometimes see puffs of nitrogen gas coming from. And this attitude control system also helps that first stage orient itself as it returns home. We're just about 20 seconds from the start of our stage 1 entry burn, and this is a 20-second burn, and it'll help slow the vehicle down as it enters the thicker parts of the Earth's atmosphere. And this is a 3-engine burn, and it is 3 engines in a row on the first stage.
Stage 1 FTS is safe.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
There's the start of the entry burn on the first stage. You can see those grid fins as the first stage is flying through its own plume there.
Stage 2 FTS is safe.
Stage 1 entry burn shut down.
We did just have a successful stage 1 entry burn there. And for those who follow along, you'll know that the soot on the rocket, second stage trajectory is still nominal. As I was saying, the soot on the rocket indicates that it's been flown before. So the fuel that we use on Falcon 9 is rocket-grade kerosene, or RP1, which is carbon-based. So when it burns, it generates soot. Now, as the booster approaches the landing site and does that long re-entry burn that we saw it fly through its own plume, which deposits that soot back onto the first stage. Now you can see this sometimes on the pad. The soot is still stuck onto the first stage from its previous flights. And if you watch closely to your onboard camera during landing, you might be able to see soot sticking on the lens of those cameras as well. Now coming up in just a few seconds, we will have the start of our stage 1 landing burn. This will be another about 20-second burn. Hopefully it will land us on our drone ship, a Shortfall of Gravitas.
Stage 2 terminal guidance.
In the Atlantic Ocean.
Stage 1 startup.
Here's the start of our stage 1 landing burn. Cool views of the drone ship approaching.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing leg.
Right there on the middle of the drone ship. We did just have the 103rd overall successful recovery of our first stage orbital
Nominal
class
orbit
rocket.
insertion.
And we just missed it there, but we did have a successful second engine cutoff, and we just got that confirmation of a good orbit from stage 2. Now, next up, we'll have one more burn on the second stage that will position the vehicle for payload deployment.
Expected loss of signal, Cape.
But we are awaiting the deployment of our 49 Starlink
Expected loss
satellites,
of signal, Bermuda.
which is scheduled to occur about 6 minutes from now at T plus 15 minutes. However, you may have just heard the call out for expected loss of signal. Again, this means we won't have live audio or visual confirmation of payload deployment due to lack of ground station coverage, but we will acquire signal with our ground station in Kodiak, Alaska at T plus 1 hour and 20 minutes. So for those of you who are interested, we will keep the audio-only countdown nets up on our YouTube channel, and we'll confirm successful payload deployment on our social media channels. But with that, that brings tonight's webcast to a close. Thank you to the Range and Federal Aviation Administration for supporting tonight's mission, to all of our viewers, as well as our Starlink customers. Starlink is live in Slovakia and Slovenia, and that means we are now live in 27 countries and regions around the world. To learn more about Starlink or to find out if service is available in your area, head over to starlink.com. Be good to one another. Thanks for joining us. Have a great evening. And as always, see you next time.